It really looks like Broderick Jones is about to be benched in favor of rookie Troy Fautanu at right tackle.
The last 2 weeks, really just preparing myself mentally, really more than anything. I think that's where I take the biggest step these last couple of weeks, just trying to make sure I'm preparing. But yeah, I think I'm ready. I know I'm ready.
Jim Wexell follows up by saying that Fautanu confirmed that he played first-team right tackle today, which was yesterday on Thursday, upon the return of Dan Moore to left tackle. Asked, will you start there Sunday? Fautanu says, I think so. I hope so. And why Fautanu playing first-team right tackle upon the return of Dan Moore to left tackle is significant, because if you guys didn't know already, I'll catch you guys up on this. Dan Moore was out early in the week of practice with an ankle injury. On Wednesday, he was DNP, and we had Broderick Jones start over at left. So we shifted him over to left. Fautanu was starting at right, taking all the first-team reps there. And that's when I think a lot of us were wondering, okay, what happens if Dan Moore becomes healthier later in the week and becomes a full participant? Well, it only took a day for us to find out how the Steelers would handle that. And they kept Dan Moore as the starting left tackle, and instead of putting Broderick Jones back to the starting right tackle, they kept Troy Fautanu taking those 1 reps. So to me, it's either we really love Fautanu and think he's going to be a Pro Bowl right tackle as soon as his rookie year. Like, it'd be an injustice for us to be holding him out of the starting lineup. Or we're really that concerned about Broderick and his injuries. Now, I guess you could say it's a combination of both. But here's how Tomlin spoke on Troy Fautanu. I think it was just at his Tuesday press conference about potentially starting at right tackle despite him being out these last 2-3 weeks with an injury.
When Troy Fautanu was injured, he was in the process of competing for a starting job. Now that he's back, but the season has started. How difficult is it to continue that process?
It's more difficult, but we have a commitment to continuing it because we like what we saw from him during team development. He's deserving of that. His talents are deserving of that. And so, we'll balance that the best we can.
Like, this is a very unique situation from multiple angles on it. Like, okay, starting a rookie, that's been done before, right? Sight unseen, especially recently. We've had guys like Pat Freiermuth start at tight end right off the bat. George Pickens. Hell, even in 2021, Kendrick Green as a third-round pick, we started him at center immediately. Same with Dan Moore, fourth-round pick. We started him at left tackle. Recently, we've had guys have to earn their spot, like Zach Frazier. I thought we were going to be starting him at center immediately once OTAs hit and in training camp, but we had Herbig out there. JPJ, it took him like 6 weeks to crack into the starting lineup. Peyton Wilson, even this offseason, we've made him earn his snaps for week 1, and he's still not officially the starter, even though I do think he outplayed or outsnapped Landon Roberts in week 1. Broderick Jones didn't start right away last year. So, yeah, you could look at the mixed bag of how we've handled rookies coming in and whether or not we've started them right off the bat or made them sit or made them like really earn their spot. But in this case, you got Fautanu being given the spot, I guess in a way. Maybe the Steelers would argue he's earned it throughout training camp. But he's been injured these last 2-3 weeks. And then his preseason performance against the Texans wasn't that good, let's be honest. So it's hard for me to say from the outside looking in that he's automatically earned the spot, particularly over a guy like Broderick Jones, who we drafted 13th overall in 2023, and whenever he did start at right tackle in his rookie season, was pretty good. And obviously he was pretty terrible in preseason this year and even last year. But week 1 against Falcons, he was solid. So it's not like it's some Joe Schmo at right tackle or it's Chooks or anything. This is Broderick Jones, the guy that we drafted to be a franchise staple for us on the offensive line. I'm just wondering why we're fast-tracking Fautanu. I think it's an honest question. I guess whatever Fautanu did in training camp, OTAs throughout this whole offseason outweighs anything he did in training camp and outweighs the fact that he's been unavailable for the last 3 weeks. I think it's strange how the Steelers are handling this, but I'm not necessarily against it. I don't have this strong case for not doing it because I wanted Broderick at left tackle and Troy starting day one over at right tackle to begin with. Like if you go back a month or two ago, I was just like, get the guys out there that you drafted in the first round. Get the future out there because there's a reason you pick these guys to replace Dan Moore. Let's just get on with it sooner rather than later. Even though Dan Moore, I still think is a quality player, but bro, you don't draft 2 tackles in the last 2 first rounds of the draft and just have them sitting and waiting the whole time. Because why draft them? When you have a guy like Dan Moore, you could have, instead of taking Fautanu this year, you could have taken Brian Thomas, and we wouldn't be complaining about wide receiver 2 issues. You could have taken Brian Thomas, and hell, you still could have taken Roman Wilson in the 3rd. I think we'd be set at receiver then with Pickens, Brian Thomas, and Roman Wilson. So if we're that confident in Dan Moore and don't really feel like we got to play a Fautanu that fast, or we could afford to sit a Broderick Jones here. Yeah, I think it's better put that way because right now it does look like Fautanu is going to start at right tackle. If you actually feel like we could be starting Dan Moore and Fautanu and have Broderick sit, we could afford to do that this year. Why'd we take Broderick Jones or Fautanu in either of these last 2 drafts? Maybe you just take one of them. I just brought up the example of who we could have taken instead of Fautanu this year, but in the Broderick Jones draft, what receiver wasn't available at that point? 13th overall. I'm trying to think. I don't even remember what receivers in last year's draft, but we could have got a really good one at 13th overall. I know that. We traded up to get Broderick. That's my question, and that's why I'm just very curious about this situation. Like, I don't necessarily think Broderick has earned the right to start over Dan Moore. I feel like he's earned the right to start over Troy Fautanu, at least over at right tackle. It's just very weird with how it's all playing out. I'm not against Fautanu starting. I just wish we would have had Broderick Jones from the start of this offseason competing at left tackle with Dan Moore so we could have seen more of an honest competition and just had Troy Fautanu starting at right and saying, Fautanu, you get right tackle spot. This is going to be your position in the long term anyway, so let's just get it out of the way. Have you starting over at right tackle? Broderick Jones, you're going to be left tackle long term. That's the vision for you. We still have Dan Moore, so let's make it a competition at least. But at least he's taken all those snaps and reps at his rightful position. Now, maybe it doesn't matter anyway because Fautanu ends up getting hurt and we have to shift Broderick Jones over to right tackle for the time being over these last 3 weeks, and Broderick Jones has to start at right tackle for week 1 anyway, and we'd be in the same scenario. But I at least wish the Steelers would have handled it that way, the way where Broderick Jones is getting all of his snaps at left tackle and competing with Dan Moore. Because maybe in that situation, Broderick beats out Dan Moore becomes expendable, and he's at least a trade piece throughout the offseason. Maybe you include him in the deal for Brandon Ayuk with the 49ers. You're more apt to do that as opposed to not being willing to trade players because you don't exactly know what your tackle situation is because it's all weird with how you have Broderick taking snaps at both positions and you're not as confident in letting a Dan Moore go. I don't know. Just some thoughts. It looks like Fautanu is going to start at right tackle. Again, I'm not really opposed to it. I wanted him starting at right tackle from the start, but I also wanted Broderick Jones over at left tackle, getting reps there and competing with Dan Moore at left tackle. Who knows, man? It's just crazy to think that Broderick Jones is probably not going to be starting in the second week of his second season. If you would have told me that back in February, March, April, or any point in this offseason, I would have said you're crazy. There's no chance. I would have said there's a much higher percent chance that Fautanu is just sitting out his rookie year. But this is where we're at. This is where we're at. And whoever's out there, obviously, as Steelers fans, we're hoping they play good. It doesn't really matter to me. But this must mean the Steelers have a ton of faith in Fautanu. Maybe they are a little concerned about Broderick and his injuries, but I thought he played good in week 1. They must really think Fautanu is that guy, and they need to get him out there immediately, and he seriously improves this offensive line by being the starter. And we'll get to find out on Sunday against the Broncos at 4 o'clock. So hope you guys enjoyed this edition of Big Deke News on a Friday. Stay chilling. Enjoy the weekend. Stay safe. Peace.